Hello, I'm Dan Mattingly, and this is the America First Committee, coming straight into your television or possibly even into your computer. I was able to, and I wanted to put together this show to try to illustrate, and I chose the name rather, to illustrate how this organization had in the past pulled from the left and from the right in its combined interest of keeping America out of war. And with that, I would like to go into our first article that I was able to get into, or read rather, on the Union Leader. In this article, in the Union Leader, an opinion piece by Senator Gordon Humphrey, it states that Congress can and should take the lead on helping Ukraine. Within it, Gordon Humphrey writes, since the White House has shown that it won't take the lead in thwarting Russian President Vladimir Putin's plan to permanently divide Ukraine, Congress should assert its role as a co-equal branch of government. The change in the Senate leadership in the next Congress will make that easier, but the Senate should act now, not wait until January. He goes on saying, further delay in supplying Ukraine with defensive weapons will give Putin time to consolidate his position and lay plans for further aggression. Delay also raises the prospect of an even more serious challenge. This time to NATO and the Baltic states, where Putin is already inventing pretexts to make trouble. He goes further down, talking about the type, a phrase such as giving them weapons so that if a tank is coming at you and you're firing with a pea shooter, you're not going to be able to stop that tank, in reference to supplying them with anti-tank weaponry. He ends it with a comparison to the 1980s support in Afghanistan to stop Soviet aggression in that country at that time. Now, my take upon this is, with much respect for our former senator from New Hampshire, that the time and place is really a big contributor to our foreign policy. When he references Afghanistan, he's referencing a time when communism was still a threat to the American way of life. It is not a threat today because of such drastic actions of the past. But today, Vladimir Putin does not and will never pose such a threat to America because he is not pushing a way of life that would be able to undermine and destroy our country, such as communism. He is an authoritarian despot who has the guise of being democratically elected, but we deal with those every day, and our republic has dealt with those since the dawn of our country. We had to deal with Napoleon at our dawn, and we did it very well by staying clear of that. Whether or not Russia divides Ukraine is a case for the Ukrainians and Russians to debate. And whether he goes further against NATO, that would draw us in, because we must comply with the treaties that we've signed. Those countries rely on us and we rely on them. But to estimate that's what he's going to do is a dangerous preemptive move that could backfire in our face. And that is my take on that article. I thank you very much. In this segment, we are going to be interviewing various members of the America First mentality. Today, for instance, we have retired Colonel Jim McConnell. He's a graduate of the U.S. Army War College, president of the New Hampshire Council of Vietnam Veterans, and the current New Hampshire State Representative-elect from Cheshire 12 out in Swansea and Richmond. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Glad to be here, Dan.
So let's start off first with the article that Senator Humphrey wrote. What would be your take on that?
Well, first off, I certainly applauded at the time, and I'm still very happy about the fact that we intervened to assist the Afghanis in thwarting the Soviet effort to take their country over. No second thoughts there from my standpoint. I think that was terrific. Question on the Ukraine, though, is a bit of a different story. First off, if you look at Ukrainian elections, the eastern half of the country continues, and as always, it seems, wanted closer relations with Russia. The idea, for example, that we got all hot and bothered that Putin took back the Crimea is ridiculous. Crimea has been part of Russia for a long time. And bottom line, in the event that they had a plebiscite there, I guess they did, although it was questioned whether or not it was thoroughly legitimate, I wouldn't doubt that they would choose to be part of Russia. And I think Eastern Ukraine might feel the same way. As far as Western Ukraine goes, clearly they want closer relations with the West. So I'd certainly be open to the idea that we would sell them defensive equipment. I don't have any problem with that. Beyond that, though, and the question that it seems to me he overlooked, is our NATO ally Poland, which is extremely happy to be in NATO, feels very close to the United States, and has asked specifically for 10,000 NATO troops to be assigned to Poland. We have 3 brigades in Germany. Well, 2 in Germany and 1 that straddles Germany and Italy. And while I don't approve of the idea that we have ground forces in Europe, it seems to me our NATO obligations can be easily satisfied with our air and naval resources. And just 2 years ago, the House Armed Services Committee asked that all of our troops be withdrawn from NATO because our NATO allies were, in almost every case, not meeting their commitment to our NATO alliance. They're obligated to spend a certain amount of money, and almost none of them are doing it. Seems that it's pretty easy to rely on the United States when given the opportunity to. To my way of thinking, if we're going to leave troops in Europe, one of those brigades, which would be about 3,500 soldiers, could go to Warsaw, help the Poles. They'd certainly be well received, and it's a lot cheaper than keeping them in Germany. So to my way of thinking, that's the 800-pound gorilla or the elephant in the room, however you want to put it, that he managed to overlook in his article. To my way of thinking, we should be doing something for Poland, even before we do something for Ukraine. And as I say, I'm open to selling Ukraine defensive weapons, but I certainly don't want to go along with the idea, if that's what he's suggesting that we might get to, of sending American troops over there.
Okay. Now, I'm a young guy, and during the Second Iraq War, one of the articles that I read that really, up until that point, I thought, oh, this seems to be a threat to us, and it really did, I felt at that time, might have been a threat. But then I read this great article from Pat Buchanan, another tie-in to the America First Committee, because he was very proud of that organization. And here's a guy from the right arguing against it, against the war. Because up until that point, I heard several people from the left arguing against the war. So that had me growing in that direction. Now, what would be your take on the Second Iraq War?
Fool's errand from the outset. It was obvious that this was something that we shouldn't get involved in. You're not just hearing that from me. The Army War College said it at the time. Had the Pentagon been free to say exactly what it wanted to say, you would have heard that almost unanimously at the Pentagon. The Sunnis have been fighting the Shias since 632. They're fighting over Muhammad's succession. We're not going to resolve that one. And one of the Shias' great dreams was a Shia crescent, which would mean that they would control Tehran, Baghdad, and Damascus. As long as Saddam Hussein was in power and could rule Iraq, that dream couldn't be realized. And our Sunni allies, the Saudis, Qatar, and the like, were very content to leave it that way. Saddam Hussein knew that he could get away with almost anything because nobody in the world would be crazy enough to throw him out of office and invade his country. Then George Bush showed up. The bottom line is we walked right into the bear trap. We have now created a situation where, because of the fact that the Shias took over Iraq, which it was clear they would because Grand Ayatollah Sistani, who was the leading Shia in Iraq, was able to control the population. And every time Paul Bremer came in with one of these schemes where he would give the Kurds extra votes because they're a separate entity and all the rest of this stuff, Sistani would merely point out it's got to be one man, one vote. And of course, he knew that he had the, he had the cards he needed for that. So the long and the short of it is, we've created a sectarian nightmare there. We've got the Kurds, the Shias, and the Sunnis. In giving the Shias control of the country, we have allowed the Sunnis, at the same time, to create an insurgency. ISIL, or ISIS, depending on what you want to call it, has largely been funded by Qatar. That, and of course, the fact that the Iraqi army, which we spent, 10 years standing up, left them a lot of weapons. I mean, they were only dropped once, so they're in great shape. But the bottom line here is that we can't win this one. And the idea that we're going to go in there and do the Shias fighting for them is flat out ridiculous. 25 years ago, the Sunnis and the Shias fought a 1 million casualty war. If we get out of the way, the Shias will be happy to do it again. The only thing that makes them happier than killing Sunnis is killing Americans who get in the middle. And if we keep doing it, it's another fool's errand. We can't help but screw it up. We haven't gotten anything right over there yet. I mean, a year ago, we wanted to take out Assad in Syria. And the bottom line is, whether we know it or not, he's our best ally at the moment in taking on ISIS. The Turks think we're flat out crazy. Erdogan has to be shaking his head every day. We have no grand strategy there. Grand strategy is that there are 3 levels of strategy. Tactics, which are when you want to take a hill or a bridge or something like that. You determine that one battalion is going to go south of the bridge and another battalion is going to attack it frontally, and finally you'll cross north of the bridge, and so on and so forth, to try to create an opportunity to take that bridge or that hill or that town or whatever it might be. Strategy is where you go ahead and, for example, we, during the Second World War, invaded Normandy, and then we insisted that we also invade the south of France to join up with that army going east to Germany. Well, that's strategy. Grand strategy is when you don't do stupid things like walking into a religious war and taking, in effect, sides. Grand strategy is also, there are any number of examples. When the Germans in the First World War got a hold of Lenin and shipped him off to Russia with the idea that they would take the Russians, or he would help take the Russians out of the First World War, which in fact he did. That's grand strategy. We have no grand strategy in the Middle East. None. And it shows. We haven't done it right over there at all, at any point. The best thing we can do is stop digging the hole that we're already in.
Now, as a military man, what would be your rubric for committing American troops or arms, such as aids in arms, to a country?
Well, first off, I'm pretty willing to sell just about anybody the best stuff. Well, qualify that best. Obviously, I want to make sure that the equipment we send them hasn't got the absolute latest technology, because we want to be able to control that. For example, when the Shah of Iran fell, we had given him some of our best equipment. Now, granted, we failed to maintain it, so after a short period of time, he couldn't get his successors couldn't get those planes off the ground or couldn't use them. But we have to be able to to make sure that we get to the point where these weapons are not going to be used against the United States. I'm not terribly concerned about either the Shias or the Sunnis on that score. None of them have an air force or a navy, so they're not going to attack the United States. They're going to be very busy going after each other. And quite frankly, I'd be willing to sell to either side, and I'm more than happy to see them use the best, and that means our stuff and American equipment. The other thing about American equipment, when you sell it overseas, you reduce the per unit cost to the American Armed Forces. So as far as I'm concerned, export like crazy.
But what about the so-called boots on the ground? When would you commit American troops? I guess what I'm asking is, what is your national interest viewpoint for committing anything like the American military to? What would actually tick off a certain level, like, oh, well, at this level, we will have to commit American troops to it?
Well, one of the things you have to recognize is the Army is extremely elastic. And when we talk, for example, about sequestration, I strongly support sequestration. To my way of thinking, the Army should be dramatically reduced. You know, if you join the Army, you're going to see Kansas. That's the way it is. And that's the way it ought to be. I don't favor continued exposure of our forces overseas, except in the most unusual cases. Poland, for example, it would seem to me is an unusual case. But certainly in the Middle East, the idea that we would permanently put boots on the ground and build a Vatican-sized embassy capable of handling 35,000 Americans is absurd. To go back to your point, though, we have a Navy, which can certainly be moved offshore. That's impressive. We have an Air Force that can do any number of things. But boots on the ground are the last thing you consider. And to my way of thinking, we only commit boots on the ground, or we should only commit boots on the ground, when we have a vital national interest at stake. There's nothing like that in the Middle East. Our only interest over there is keeping the Straits of Hormuz open. To that end, I'd be more than happy to have the help of the Japanese, Chinese, Russian, British, you name it, navies. Doesn't really matter to me. The key is that the straits have to be left open. And by the way, whoever's got the oil over there is going to sell it, because if they don't sell it, they don't eat. That's our only interest over there, period.
Okay. Now that you had brought up selling not the best, but the second best American military equipment, people might talk about the Korean Peninsula and going forward with that. Is that a commitment that is within America's national interest?
Well, to my way of thinking, again, we have something called the 8th Army over there, which is our American Army. Mm-hmm. And I really don't see the need to keep GIs over there. And the idea that we would be threatened and that they would be a short fuse for a war footing, to my way of thinking, is belied by the fact that we have all kinds of dependents over there. If you're going to send someone over there on that basis, you leave dependents home. You don't have a lot of women and children over there who are going to need to be evacuated. And from our standpoint, the Koreans are one of the wealthiest countries in the world. They can certainly defend their country. They have a very capable army, and we can sell them whatever they need to be a formidable force should they need something that we haven't already sold them. To my way of thinking, that's an enormous strain on us financially, and those troops can be brought home. I don't favor having troops permanently stationed on the Korean Peninsula. Korea is now a solid country, fully capable of defending itself. To the extent that they need American assistance, we have air power and naval power that can help them. We don't need to have boots on the ground.
Now, I have to be in agreement with that. I would like to reduce the American footprint around the world because, from my very young viewing of it, it's only seemed to incite and anger the folks. Now, we had brought up the Middle East, and if I remember correctly, Osama bin Laden specifically noted about how we had American troops in Saudi Arabia.
That's exactly right.
And that was one of his big Casabellis there. Am I pronouncing my Latin right?
Casabelli.
Casabelli.
I think. I don't know. I never paid much attention to that, to be honest with you, but go ahead.
That was one of his big issues for trying to attack America proper, was the fact that we had troops in what was considered the country that held the holy sites of Mecca and Medina.
Right.
So having our footprint around the world doesn't seem to be protecting us at home as best as I would have assumed at a younger age.
Well, if you look, for example, go back to Baghdad. We built an embassy there bigger than the Vatican. It's capable of handling 35,000 Americans. Now, that has to be an affront to everybody in the Middle East. It's clearly, and I know people don't want to hear this, but it's clearly an imperial outpost. And the whole idea, I'm sure, was that we're going to run the Middle East from here. And that's a crazy idea. Stepping into the middle of a religious war is nuts. I was assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Budapest, where I was responsible for the line of communications in from Germany to the former Yugoslavia. And I think it was 100 by 100, and I think it was 5 stories high. And it was one of the larger embassies in Central Europe. 35,000 personnel is amazing. That's an astonishing number. I don't know how many people we had at that embassy, but it wasn't anything like, I can't even believe it was 300. And probably a whole lot less than that. But I think at some point we're going to find that ISIS will attempt to take Baghdad and close the airport. We'll have to evacuate what personnel we have there. And we may find, like we did when we blundered into Libya, we may find ISIS swimming in our swimming pools at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad and raising their black flag where the Stars and Stripes used to fly. And I think that's a real travesty, but frankly, it was insane to put it there in the first place in that way.
I'm glad you brought up Libya, seeing how, so the former Colonel Gaddafi, dictator of the country, he had been the pariah of the international scene because of his bombings of the Lockerbie, at Lockerbie and in Beirut, I believe in Berlin,
No, he didn't have anything to do with Beirut.
Okay, but he had...
Well, there were various explosions in in Germany, which affected some of our troops, and some of that, if I recall correctly, was attributed to Gaddafi. Whether or not that's true, I don't know.
So he was known as a state sponsor of international terrorism
Right.
and supporting it specifically against America. Now, in the 2000s, he starts to reform.
Right.
He says, West, you've been making a good case. I'm terrified you're going to try to topple me. So here's all my weapons. Here's all my chemical and biological weapons. Take them away. I don't want you arresting my sons when they go on the little retreats in Switzerland anymore. Let's try to play nice. So he does what we've asked him to do for 30, 40 years as the international community. We've asked him, you don't need these things. This is a dangerous mix. He does what we want on one front. And so our national interest is served.
Right.
As soon as that happens, we go, okay, good. He's weakened. He's in a weakened position. And that's when the Arab Spring, a few years later, comes through, and we see another opportunity where, in his weakened position, he's even weaker. And in my opinion, we foolishly aided the rebels in that country by using our weapons to try to take out Gaddafi's air power and other Gaddafi sources of power that were still remaining so they could more easily topple that country. But it doesn't serve our national interest to create chaos in Libya, which is what we have now.
Agreed, but you've got to go beyond that, it seems to me. We've also created a wonderful disincentive from the standpoint of somebody who has serious weapons to never give them up. I mean, they've got to think seriously about that. The Americans are coming and asking us to give up our weapons, so to speak. And the dictator at that point has to say, gee, how's that worked out for the other guys? Nobody's going to do that. And that's the reason why, because they have to look at the Gaddafi case and say, wait a minute. So if we wanted to find a reason for people not to do that, boy, we put it right up there in neon lights.
Now, of course, I'm not arguing, I believe you're not arguing, that we should prop up authoritarian regimes around the world like Gaddafi, but we should not be actively trying to undermine or overthrow them because it's not going to be directly in our national interest. And it's not going to benefit or save us in what would seem to be the long term. Would you agree with that, or do you have a different take?
Yeah, I think you probably have to think along those lines. I'm reminded of the time when Lawrence Spivak in the 1960s had the Shah of Iran on Meet the Press and asked him about the excesses of his SAVAK, which are his secret police. And the Shah of Iran was no shrinking violet, and more than happy to tell you exactly what he thought. Said, Mr. Spivak, I have not been asked one word about that. I've made it clear that I'm supporting Israel, and as long as I do, no one will ask me about anything. Well, 15 years later, or thereabouts, we found that he was overthrown, and we were completely frozen out of that part of the world. The Iranians had nothing to do with us, took some of our people as hostages at the U.S. Embassy, and became the bad guys who were our big ally. Had we insisted that the Shah consider some sort of, gave some thought to human rights, to my way of thinking, it might not have been as bad as it was, and he might not have been overthrown at all. But as it is, rest is history.
So I guess I'd like to wrap up with, in this 21st century, this at the start of this show, we have a quote from the very first president of America. So that's 230 years ago now, roughly. Just
Something along those
give or take. It's about 5 years there. And it's talking about how you should have commercial relations with foreign countries, but you should limit any and all political affiliations that way. Do you think that's still relevant today? And do you think that's something that we should try to increase in the debates, either in the House, in the Senate, and hopefully for president?
Wait a second. You're asking about relations or military?
We're talking about whether or not commercial relations should be completely divorced from political relations.
I don't think you can completely divorce them from political considerations, but by the same token, we have to have good relations with everybody in the world. We have no permanent enemies and no permanent friends. Bottom line is we have to look out for America. I think even better than Washington's quote is Adams' quote, where he said we shouldn't be going abroad seeking dragons to slay. And that's what we're doing. I mean, in 1998, the Project for the New America Century, which Jeb Bush was a signatory to, pardon me, that's elevating him beyond his station, signed, they wanted to, called for the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. Well, that wasn't in America's interest, and it's not something we should have done. Bottom line, I don't want American boots on the ground overseas unless there's some real compelling reason for us to be there. Right now, the ISIS is using us as their recruiter, and they're doing everything they can to bait us. They will continue capturing Americans and beheading them as long as Americans continue to be over there. And the fact is, what they want is American boots on the ground because they want us on their turf where they can beat us. Now, I'm inclined to agree we had them licked, but clearly it was the sort of beating that could only be maintained at the point of a gun. I mean, we could keep them in line as long as we pointed our weapons at them and told them, move half an inch out of line, we'll blow your head off. But that's not the kind of relations we should have around the world. And in a religious war, it's suicidal. Because the worst thing that can happen here is we go over and beat them soundly. Beating them soundly will only be an illusory victory because they'll go back in their holes and sure enough, they'll appear over here and be blowing up every little girl's lemonade stand. That's stupid. Let them kill each other.
I would like to thank you, Jim, for coming on the show. I think that what we're doing or we're trying to do on the show, and I hope with some help from you and from other people within the community, would be able to sound off and tell the folks at home that you can actually stand up and this is not a fringe thought, that this is actually goes right to the root of America.
You bet it does. And I must tell you that my activities with the veterans community tell me that there's a whole lot more support out there than you would ever believe in reading the papers.
Well, I thank you again for watching this program, and you can reach me at either my P.O. Box or the email address, which should be coming up onto the screen. We have the America First Committee, P.O. Box 108, Auburn, New Hampshire, 03032, and my email address, which is americafirstcommittee@gmail.com.